At the dinner table, my husband said, "My kids need this money more than you do." They weren't even my kids. I stayed quiet and nodded. The next morning, his lawyer called him screaming. My husband went pale when he heard what I'd done the night before. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching, get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. The taste of the salmon turned to chalk in my mouth. I had prepared it with a lemon dill butter, the way Robert preferred. The asparagus was crisp, the rice pilaf fragrant. A Tuesday night dinner, like any other, in the dining room with the table I had searched 6 months to find. The crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, and the silverware felt heavy and cold in my hand. "So it's decided," Robert said, not looking up from his plate as he cut into the fish. "I'm redirecting the Napa Valley Fund. The deposit will be transferred tomorrow." I set my fork down. The click of the metal against the china was a precise, sharp sound. "The vacation fund," I stated. My voice was quieter than I intended. "We've been building that for 2 years." "Yes, well, priorities shift." He took a sip of the Cabernet I had opened to breathe an hour before. "Mark is finally closing on that condo, and the down payment is higher than he projected. Lisa's tuition for her master's program is due. They need the capital." I watched his face. He was in his lawyer mode, presenting a settled case. His brow was smooth, his movements efficient. This was not a discussion. It was a briefing. "How much of it?" I asked. "All of it. It's roughly 28,000. It covers the gaps nicely." The number hung in the air between us. $28,000. 56 weeks of setting aside $500 from my design commissions. From the household budget I managed down to the last penny. 56 weeks of imagining us in a vineyard, a break from his deadlines and my color swatches. A shared goal. "Robert," I began, my throat tight. "That was our plan, we agreed." He finally looked at me, and his expression was one of mild impatience, the kind you show a child who doesn't understand a simple directive. "Valerie, be reasonable. They have immediate, concrete needs. A vacation is a luxury. It can wait." A coldness spread through my chest, sharp and clear. And my need for a break, our need for time together. He waved his hand, dismissing the words as sentimental clutter. "We'll take a long weekend somewhere local later. The coast, perhaps. This is more important." He took another bite, chewed and swallowed. Then he delivered the line, the one he saw as merely factual, the final, unassailable piece of logic. "My kids need this money more than you do." The room did not spin. The lights did not dim. Instead, everything became terribly, painfully focused. I saw the faint weave of the linen tablecloth. I saw a single crumb beside his bread plate. I heard the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. And I felt the words land, not as a surprise, but as a brutal confirmation of a truth I had spent a decade politely ignoring. My kids, not our asterisk kids, never ours. They were 19 and 22 when I married him. I had tried. I had remembered birthdays with careful gifts, attended graduations, listened to their dramas. I had nursed Lisa through mono during her sophomore year. I had helped Mark draft his first resume. I had done the emotional labor of a parent without the title, without the authority, and certainly, I now saw, without the consideration. And in his mind, I was a luxury, deferrable, a line item that could be postponed indefinitely. I looked at my husband of 11 years. I saw the man whose tie I straightened every morning, whose coffee I brewed to the exact strength he required, whose social calendar I maintained so his life ran without friction. I saw the beneficiary of my quiet labor, who saw that labor as a given, as my natural role. A strange calm settled over me. It was not acceptance. It was the absolute stillness that comes when a fundamental decision is made, deep in the bones, where words cannot reach. I picked up my fork again. "I see," I said, my voice flat and even. "If their need is that pressing." He nodded, a quick, satisfied jerk of his chin. The matter was closed. "It is, I knew you, understand, you're practical." Practical, the word was a brand. It meant compliant. It meant I did not make emotional, inconvenient demands. We finished the meal in silence, broken only by the sounds of eating. The food was ash in my mouth, but I swallowed every bite. I would need my strength. When he pushed his plate away and stood, heading to his study with a murmured comment about a late conference call, I remained seated. I listened to his footsteps fade. Then I stood and began to clear the table. My hands were steady. I stacked the plates with care, not a clatter. I gathered the silverware, the smudged glasses. I wiped the polished wood of the table where a water ring had formed, erasing the mark with methodical circles. As I carried the load to the kitchen, I looked at the scene in the dining room. The empty chairs. The 2 crystal glasses, one still half full of wine. The dying light from the chandelier on the empty table. It looked like a stage after the actors had left. A performance was over. The performance of our marriage. The one where I played the devoted, practical wife, and he played the benevolent provider. I had believed in it for a long time. I had written my lines with care and delivered them with conviction. But his line tonight, asterisk, my kids need this money more than you do, asterisk, was an ad-lib that broke the scene. It revealed the playwright, and it was him alone, writing a narrative where I was a supporting character, my plotlines disposable to serve the main arc of his bloodline. In the kitchen, under the fluorescent glow, I loaded the dishwasher with mechanical precision. The warm water on my hands felt real, an anchor. The rage was there, a solid, cold weight in my stomach, but it was contained. It was not a fire to be fanned. It was a fuel to be measured and used. He thought this was an isolated transaction, a necessary reallocation of resources. He did not know that with one sentence, he had handed me a key. The key to a door I had been politely refusing to look at for years. The door behind which lay the ledgers, the agreements, the cold, hard numbers of our life together. I finished in the kitchen. The house was quiet, save for the low murmur of his voice behind his study door. I turned off the lights and walked upstairs. I did not go to our bedroom. I walked past it, down the hall to the small, sunlit room I used as my home office. I sat in my chair. The monitor was dark. I placed my palms flat on the desk. Tonight was not the beginning of the hurt. It was the end of the silence. He had given me the reason, the clear, unambiguous justification I had never allowed myself to seek. I opened my eyes and looked at the dark screen. Tomorrow I would begin. Tomorrow I would look at the numbers. But for now, in the quiet dark, I let the new reality settle. The wife who nodded and accepted was gone. In her place sat a woman with a ledger to balance, and for the first time in a very long time, the calculations were entirely my own. I did not sleep. The bed was a wide, cold expanse, and Robert's steady breathing beside me was the sound of a stranger. In the dark, the numbers began to arrange themselves in my mind. $28,000 was not an isolated sum. It was a data point. I waited until the digital clock read 4:17 a.m., then slid from the sheets. My office was a sanctuary of order. I did not turn on the overhead light. The blue glow of the monitor was sufficient. I opened our primary joint banking portal. The username and password were ones I had created 11 years ago when we merged our lives. Robert had never bothered to change them, a fact that now seemed like an oversight born of profound disregard. The homepage displayed the balances, checking, savings, the money market. I started with the savings account, the one earmarked for the vacation. The pending transaction was already there, a transfer of $28,400 scheduled for 9:00 a.m. to an account number I did not recognize. I noted the number. Then I began to scroll back through the history. At first it was mundane, mortgage payments, utility transfers, my monthly allocations for groceries and household. Then I saw it, a transfer from 3 months prior for $5,000 to the same unfamiliar account. The memo line read Loan M. I assumed M was Mark. I opened a new spreadsheet on my computer, the first blank page a digital ledger. I entered the date, the amount, the memo. Methodically, I worked backward. 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. The transfers varied in size: $1,200 for tuition, $3,500 for car repair, $800 for rent supplement. They were not regular, which made them easier to miss. They were intermittent, responding to the crises and needs of his adult children. I documented each one. The tally grew. Then I navigated to the credit card statements. Robert handled the payments, but I had viewing access. I found recurring charges I had questioned in the past, large electronics purchases, furniture deliveries to an address in another city. He had dismissed them as client gifts, business expenses. I had accepted that. Now I cross-referenced the dates with my own calendar. A $2,800 charge at a high-end home goods store coincided with Lisa moving into a new apartment. I added it to the spreadsheet. My fingers were cold on the keyboard. The only sound was the soft tap of the keys and the hum of the computer. I created a new tab, labeling it Second Account Analysis. Using the account number from the pending transfer, I attempted to log in through the bank's main site. Access was denied. It was not a joint account. But our bank system had a feature for viewing linked external accounts for transfer purposes. I navigated there. There it was, listed as Robert Miller Personal Reserve. He had opened it 5 years ago. I could not see its full transaction history, but I could see the incoming transfers. They matched my growing list. This was the reservoir fed by our joint resources from which he funded his other life, his primary family. The sun began to lighten the sky outside my window. I had data from the past 2 years. It was not enough. I needed the origin. I logged into the investment portal for his 401k and our joint brokerage. I examined the withdrawal histories and dividend reinvestments. Buried in the annual summaries, I found it. 3 years ago, a bonus he had told me was reinvested had actually been diverted. A line item noted a disbursement to a checking account, the last 4 digits matching his secret one. A pattern, not an incident. A systemic diversion of marital assets, conducted with the calm precision of a man balancing a ledger where my column was labeled expendable. I sat back. The spreadsheet was now several pages long. Columns for date, amount, source account, purported reason, and my deduced actual purpose. The final sum, for just the 2-year period I could fully document, was $87,650. $87,000, not a trivial reallocation. A second mortgage on our partnership, taken out without my signature. I felt a pressure behind my eyes, but it was not the hot rush of tears. It was the cold, building pressure of facts too heavy to ignore. I had devoted years to building a home, a shared life. I had scaled back my design business, taking only local clients to manage the complexities of his asterisk life, his social obligations, his home, his children's intermittent needs. My contribution had been measured in time, care, and foregone income. His had been measured in dollars, and he had been secretly reclaiming them. A single, sharp tear fell from my right eye. It hit the keyboard with a soft tap. I watched it bead on the plastic. I did not wipe it away. It was not a tear of sadness, but of furious, crystalline clarity. The hurt was being chemically transformed, metabolized into something usable. Resolve. I printed the spreadsheet. The printer whirred to life, spitting out page after page of betrayal in crisp, black Times New Roman. I collected the sheets, ordered them neatly, and placed them in a simple manila folder. The folder felt significant in my hands, the physical weight of the truth. Downstairs, I heard Robert moving, the shower running, the routine of his morning. He would dress in his tailored suit, drink the coffee I would make, and go to his important job, secure in the knowledge that his world was under his control. I closed the spreadsheet. I cleared the browser history. I powered down the monitor. The evidence was secure, both digitally and in the folder now locked in my desk drawer. As I stood to go downstairs and perform the first act of my day, grinding the coffee beans, I understood my position completely. I was no longer the wronged wife wondering if she was overreacting. I was a shareholder who had discovered embezzlement. I was an auditor who had found the discrepancy. The emotional plea had died at the dinner table. What remained was a contractual dispute. And I intended to win it. The coffee I made that morning was perfect. I watched Robert drink it, his attention already on the financial news scrolling on his tablet. He made a comment about the market. I nodded. The familiar ritual was a cloak I wore, and it felt neither heavy nor light. It was simply necessary. After he left, the house settled into its daytime silence. I went to my office, but not to the spreadsheet. I picked up my phone and texted Karen. "Need to talk. Can you meet at the grind at 11? Her reply was immediate. Of course, everything okay. We'll explain then, I typed back. I did not elaborate. The grind was a cafe 3 miles from our neighborhood, all exposed brick and overstuffed armchairs. Karen was already there, securing our usual corner table. She stood as I approached, her sharp eyes scanning my face. Karen was a decade older than me, a real estate agent who had seen every kind of domestic transaction, happy and bitter. She had never liked Robert, a fact she had communicated not with words, but with a certain tightness around her mouth whenever his name came up. I sat down, placing the manila folder on the table between us. I ordered a chamomile tea. Karen had a black coffee, already steaming. Talk to me, Val, she said, dispensing with small talk. I opened the folder and slid the first summary page toward her. 2 nights ago, Robert informed me he was taking our entire vacation fund, $28,000, to give to Mark and Lisa. He said they needed it more than I did. Karen's face hardened. She did not look surprised. That bastard. I couldn't sleep. I went through the accounts. I tapped the paper. This is just the last 2 years, $87,000, transferred from our joint accounts to a separate account in his name only, for their rent, tuition, cars, you name it. She picked up the sheet, her eyes darting down the columns of numbers. Her jaw tightened. And you had no idea. Individual transactions, I questioned. He had explanations, business expenses, client gifts. I chose to believe him. The admission was clinical. I have viewing access to everything. He never revoked it. He never considered I would look this closely. Karen set the paper down and leaned forward, her voice low and fierce. You have to confront him. Tonight, throw this in his smug face. Let him see what he's done. I shook my head. No. No, Valerie, he's been stealing from you, from your marriage. He has, I agreed, my voice even. And a confrontation will lead to tears, to apologies that may or may not be real, to promises he will break the moment their next crisis arises. It will be emotional, messy, and ultimately, it will change nothing. He will justify it. He will say he was providing for his children. He will paint me as selfish for wanting a vacation over their needs. Karen stared at me, her anger momentarily stalled by my calm. So what then? You just let it go. I am going to do something, I said, stirring my tea slowly. But it will not be emotional. It will be financial. It will be legal. He values control and money. That is where he feels powerful, so that is where he will lose. A slow understanding began to dawn in Karen's eyes. The professional in her pushed past the outrage. You want to hit him in the wallet, for real. I want what is mine, exactly what is mine. Not a penny more, not a penny less. I want it separated, cleanly and irrevocably from what is his. And I want the process to cost him, professionally and personally, more than the $87,000 ever could. What's your move? She asked, her tone shifting from friend to strategist. The first move is to quietly separate my financial contributions from the joint accounts. I have records. I know what I deposited from my business over the years, what I saved from household budgets. I can trace it. I will move those funds to a new account. He'll notice a large withdrawal, Karen cautioned. Not if it's done in increments that mirror regular spending. Not if it's done while he is preoccupied with a major merger he's been stressing over for months. He only looks at the bottom line, not the line items. I have been the line item expert for 11 years. A fierce, proud smile touched Karen's lips. It was the first genuine expression I had seen on anyone's face in days. You've already thought this through. I have been thinking it through since I sat at that table and swallowed my food instead of my words. I took a sip of my tea. It was bland, soothing. The confrontation will come, Karen, but it will be on my terms when my position is secure. He will not see it coming until there is nothing he can do to stop it. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her grip was strong. What do you need from me? For now, just this. To know I am not insane. To know that wanting a measured, legal response is not a weakness. Honey, it's the strongest thing I've heard you say in years, she said, her voice thick. He underestimated you. They always do. I placed the spreadsheet back into the folder. The evidence was no longer a secret shared with a dark room. It was a blueprint, discussed in daylight. The path forward felt less like a leap into the unknown and more like the first logical step in a sequence I was finally ready to execute. We finished our drinks speaking of ordinary things, the housing market, a mutual friend's new grandchild. The normalcy was a practiced performance, but it felt less like a lie and more like a necessary intermission. When we parted outside the cafe, the sun was high. "Keep me updated," Karen said. "Every step." "I will." As I drove home, the cold knot in my stomach had loosened, replaced by a sense of clear direction. The hurt was not gone, it was compartmentalized, filed away under motivation. Robert would be home for dinner. I would cook. We would talk. He would believe the world was exactly as he left it. And I would begin, that very night, to quietly, meticulously dismantle it. Dinner that night was roasted chicken. I moved through the kitchen as I always had, but my mind was elsewhere, running calculations. Robert talked about a difficult client at the firm. I made appropriate sounds of sympathy. His distraction was my advantage. He saw a wife listening. He did not see an accountant at work. Later, in my office with the door closed, I opened a new browser window in private mode. I had already spent the afternoon creating a second, more personal spreadsheet. This one did not track Robert's diversions. It tracked my contributions. My freelance design income deposited into the joint checking over the past 5 years, since I scaled back. The annual savings I generated by managing our household budget below his generous allocations. The documented deposits from the sale of my condo before our marriage, which had formed the bulk of our initial joint savings. I had the statements, the tax returns, the old check registers. It was all orderly, a habit instilled by my father, a man who believed a woman's financial independence was her strongest armor. I had let that armor rust. Now I polished it, entry by entry. The total was not a round number. It was $182,467, a sum earned and saved by me, commingled with his larger earnings in the pool he had been secretly dipping into for his children. I did not want his money. I wanted mine back. The next step was the new account. Earlier that day, I had driven to a different bank, one where Robert and I had no joint business. I opened a savings account in my name only, using my maiden name, Wright. The banker was polite, efficient. I deposited a small initial amount from my personal checking, a relic account from my business that still had a few $1,000s he never bothered with. Now online, I linked this new account to our joint accounts. The system asked for verification via small deposits. I initiated them. It would take 2 days. This was the foundation. The following evening, Robert announced he would be at the firm late for the next 3 nights due to the impending merger. "It's a beast," he said, rubbing his temples. "But the closing is in 10 days. After that, things should calm down." "You should focus," I said, pouring him more water. "Don't worry about things here. I'll hold down the fort." He gave me an absent smile, already mentally in his office. "I know you will." The fort, I thought. The fort he was funding from my treasury. The verification deposits cleared. I sat before the monitor, my spreadsheet open on one side, the banking portal on the other. I began not with a large, noticeable sum, but with a modest one. A transfer of $3,000 from our joint savings to my new account. The memo line read home office equipment. It was a category I used for business expenses, plausible and routine. I submitted it. The next day, I transferred $2,500, memo, client reimbursement pending. Another $4,200 the day after, tax estimate set aside. The amounts varied, mimicking the irregular deposits of my freelance work. They were all below the threshold that would trigger any internal bank alert, and they were all supported on paper by my meticulous records of my own income. As I worked, a memory surfaced, not as an emotional reverie but as a pertinent data point. 3 years ago, I had landed a significant project redesigning a boutique hotel lobby. The client had been demanding, the hours long. The final payment, a direct deposit of $18,000, had hit our joint account. Robert had seen it. "Nice work," he had said, and then asked if it could help cover the new patio furniture. I had agreed. The patio furniture was for our shared home, after all. Now I located that deposit in the history. I marked it. That was my labor, my design sense, my client relationship. I transferred $9,000, half, a balancing of that particular scale. A week into this quiet campaign, I had moved $41,750. A significant number, but a fraction of the whole, scattered like leaves in a wind he wasn't watching. I checked the joint account balances daily. The ebb and flow appeared normal, especially with his large direct deposits coming in and the regular outflow of mortgage and bills. My subtractions were invisible against that background noise. One night, he left his laptop open on the kitchen counter while he took a call. The banking app was not open, but the ease with which he left his digital life accessible struck me. It was the confidence of a man who believed he had no adversaries in his own home. I did not touch it. I did not need to. My access was already authorized, my actions already in motion. The final large transfer I planned was the most justifiable. I calculated the total amount I had saved from household management over 5 years, the difference between his expected budget for groceries, utilities, maintenance, and what I had actually spent through careful shopping, planning, and doing some repairs myself. The surplus had always just stayed in the joint account, becoming part of the general pool. My spreadsheet estimated it at $31,200. I would take half, $15,600, payment for services rendered. I initiated it as 2 transfers over 2 days. Vendor refund appliance, insurance premium adjustment. The mouse clicked under my finger with a soft, definitive sound. The screen refreshed. The transaction was pending. I leaned back. My new account balance now read $98,100. Not yet the full sum, but a substantial reclamation. The rest was tied in longer-term investments I could not touch without alert. This was the liquid, movable portion, my portion. I closed the banking portal. I erased the browser history. I shut down the computer. Downstairs, I made a cup of tea and stood at the dark kitchen window. I could see the reflection of the room behind me, the clean counters, the orderly space I maintained. For the first time, the sight did not fill me with a sense of dutiful obligation. It felt like a workspace where a necessary project was nearing completion. The scales were not yet balanced, but they were finally moving. My silence was no longer passive acceptance. It was the quiet hum of a machine operating exactly as designed. He was preoccupied with building his fortune at the office. I was quietly, legally, dismantling his at home, and he had no idea the foundation was already gone. The money was secure. The digital trail was clean, coded in the bland language of household finance. But money was only one pillar. The next step required paper, ink, and signatures. It required the past. The following morning, after Robert left for work, I drove downtown to the main branch of the security box company. I had not visited our box in over 2 years. Robert handled the physical documents of our life, the car titles, the insurance policies. It was another task I had ceded, another element of control I had surrendered for the sake of harmony. Now I needed to see what was mine. The clerk verified my identification and secondary key. The box was in both our names. I was led to the private room. The metal box slid out with a familiar weight. I placed it on the table and opened it. On top lay the fireproof document case. I unzipped it. Here were the papers, the titles to his car and mine, the insurance binders, the warranty for the roof. Beneath them, in a separate, heavier envelope, was what I sought. The prenuptial agreement. Robert had insisted. He was a lawyer, it was prudent, he said. He had used his own firm to draft it. At the time, I had been slightly offended but ultimately agreed. My assets were modest, my condo, my fledgling business. His were more substantial. It seemed fair. I signed without independent counsel, a fact that now seemed like another symptom of my trust. I unfolded the document. The legal language was dense, but I read it slowly, focusing on the operative clauses. It was not a harsh agreement. It protected his premarital assets and future inheritance. It protected my premarital assets. It stated that assets accrued during the marriage would be considered joint, subject to equitable distribution. I read that clause twice. equitable distribution. The words had a dry, judicial sound. They did not account for secret, unilateral diversions. But the key point was this: the agreement did not penalize me. It did not waive my rights to support or a share of marital property. It was, in fact, relatively standard. Robert's smugness in having it had been the point, not its draconian terms. He had wanted the symbol of control. The document itself was neutral ground. I set it aside. Next, I found the folder labeled Real Property. Inside was the deed to our house. I pulled it out. My breath caught, not from emotion, but from recognition. The house was in my name, Valerie Wright. I had forgotten the specifics. In the rush of buying 5 years ago, my credit score had been significantly higher than Robert's due to his earlier financial entanglements from his first divorce. To secure the best mortgage rate, the lender had strongly advised putting the loan in my name. Robert had agreed, reluctantly. The down payment had come from our joint account, which contained the proceeds from my sold condo and his savings. But the legal title, the deed resting in my hands, listed me as the sole owner. He had joked about it. "My wife owns the roof over my head," he'd say at parties. It was a charming anecdote about wifely supremacy, one that masked a financial reality he must have quietly resented. I had never thought of it as power. I had thought of it as a logistical detail. Now I held it. The paper was crisp. It was not a symbol. It was a fact. I placed the deed and the prenuptial agreement into my large handbag. I returned the other documents to the box, closed it, and slid it back into its vault. My next stop was an office building on the other side of the city, nowhere near Robert's firm. I had made an appointment under my maiden name the day before. The plaque on the door read, Eleanor Vance, Family Law. Eleanor Vance was a woman in her 60s with a calm, assessing gaze. Her office was warm, filled with books and green plants, a stark contrast to the cold marble of Robert's workplace. I sat across from her and, without preamble, laid the 2 documents on her desk. "I believe I need to prepare for a separation," I said. "I would like you to review these and tell me my position." She nodded, put on her glasses, and began to read. She spent several minutes on the prenuptial, making a few notes. She looked at the deed, her eyebrows lifting slightly. "You are the sole title holder." "Yes, the mortgage is in my name as well." "Whose funds constituted the down payment?" "A combination. Approximately 60% from the sale of my separate property condo, 40% from his premarital savings, all deposited into a joint account before the purchase." I handed her a 1-page summary I had prepared, showing the wire transfer records. She studied it. Commingled funds can create a claim for reimbursement. However, title is title. This is significant. She turned back to the prenup. "This agreement is not unfavorable to you. It acknowledges marital property. Your task will be to define what constitutes marital property and prove its dissipation." She looked at me. "Dissipation means one spouse used marital assets for a purpose unrelated to the marriage without the other's consent. Do you have evidence of that?" I opened my bag and placed the manila folder containing the spreadsheet on her desk. "I have a record of secret transfers from our joint accounts to a separate account of his, used to support his adult children from a prior marriage, over at least 2 years. I have approximately $90,000 documented." Eleanor Vance opened the folder. She scanned the first page, then flipped through the detailed sheets. A small, professional smile touched her lips. "This is very thorough. This is not just notes, this is evidence." "Will it be enough?" "It is a compelling start. Combined with your title to the domicile and a relatively benign prenuptial, your position is strong, very strong." She closed the folder. "What is your desired outcome, Mrs. Wright?" "To retain the house. To secure the return of the marital assets I can prove are my contribution, which I have already begun to separate. To achieve a clean, legal separation that prevents further dissipation. And," I added, my voice level, "to ensure his firm is aware of his use of marital resources, as it may represent a conflict of interest with certain clients." Her gaze sharpened with interest. "You wish to involve his professional standing?" "Only if necessary to ensure a swift and fair resolution. I believe the threat will be more effective than the action." She leaned back, steepling her fingers. You have been thinking like a lawyer. No, I said. I have been thinking like a person who has run out of other options. She agreed to represent me. We discussed retainer fees. I wrote her a check from my new account. The amount was substantial, but it felt like an investment, not an expense. When I left her office, the late afternoon sun was bright. The deed and prenuptial were back in my bag, their meaning transformed. They were not relics of a shared life. They were tools, components of the structure I was building for my exit. I drove home, the legal certainty settling into my bones alongside the financial groundwork. Robert's world was built on assumptions, that I was compliant, that I was unaware, that my kindness was weakness. He was wrong on every count. I arrived before him. I returned the documents to my private filing cabinet in my office, not to the security box. They needed to be close at hand. When his car pulled into the driveway, I was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for a stir-fry. The familiar sounds of his return, the key in the lock, the sigh as he dropped his briefcase, were now the sounds of a countdown. He came into the kitchen, loosening his tie. Long day, he said, pouring himself a scotch. I can imagine, I replied, my knife hitting the cutting board in a steady, rhythmic cadence. The sound was firm, controlled, a metronome marking time. The stir-fry was eaten, the dishes washed. The week proceeded with the placid rhythm of a well-rehearsed play. I performed my role, and Robert, absorbed in his merger, saw only the familiar surface. The final piece of intelligence I needed was a date. Not just any date, but the specific day of the merger closing. He had mentioned it was soon, but soon was not a tactical advantage. I needed the calendar square. Sunday morning presented the opportunity. It was his one morning to linger, to read the paper, to be at ease in what he considered his domain. I decided to make pancakes, his favorite. The act was not sentimental, it was strategic, a tool to lower his guard. The kitchen was warm with the smell of coffee and browning butter. I mixed the batter from scratch, a detail he appreciated. He sat at the breakfast nook, scrolling through news on his tablet, already dressed in casual weekend wear. Blueberries, I asked, holding the container. Please, he said, not looking up. I folded them into the batter. The first pancake sizzled as it hit the pan. I poured the coffee and set his mug beside him. Big week coming up, I asked, my voice light, conversational. I flipped the pancake at the perfect moment, a golden brown. He sighed, a sound of weighty importance. The biggest. The Carlyle merger closes on Thursday. It's been 18 months of work. The partners are breathing down my neck. If this falls apart now... He let the sentence hang, implying professional catastrophe. Thursday, I committed the word to memory. I placed a perfect, berry-studded pancake on his plate. It won't fall apart. You've never lost one of these before. The praise was deliberate, fuel for his ego. He smiled slightly, cutting into the pancake. No, I haven't, but the other side is getting jumpy. New counsel came in last week, raising last-minute due diligence flags. It's a nuisance. We have to reassure everyone, hold the line on the valuation. I poured batter for another pancake, my movement steady. So Thursday is the absolute final day. No more delays. It has to be. The financing commitment letters expire Friday at 5 p.m. If we don't have signatures by close of business Thursday, the whole deal could unravel. Billions. It would be a disaster. He took a bite, chewed. His focus was on the problem, not the person listening. Billions, a disaster. The words were not hyperbole to him. They were the stakes of his professional identity. This was the pressure point. It must be exhausting, I said, layering sympathy over my inquiry. All that responsibility. It is, but it's also the win that defines a career. The bonus alone, he trailed off, perhaps remembering that discussing bonuses with me was now a complicated subject. He cleared his throat. Anyway, it'll be a relief when it's done. I'm sure. I plated my own pancake and sat across from him. Will you be at the office late every night until then? Probably. Tomorrow through Wednesday will be brutal. All-nighters likely. I'll sleep at the club downtown if it gets too late to drive back. He said it as a matter of fact, a minor inconvenience in his grand narrative. The club, he kept a membership at a private athletic club with sleeping rooms for businessmen. It was plausible. It also meant he would be absent, physically and mentally, for the next 72 hours. My planning window was now perfectly defined. "Well, just try to eat something that isn't takeout," I said, slipping back into the wifely script. "I can pack you some meals." He waved a hand. "Don't trouble yourself. The firm will have catering. You just hold things together here." I nodded, sipping my coffee. Hold things together. He had no idea how thoroughly I intended to do just that. We finished breakfast in companionable quiet, the kind we had cultivated over years. But the silence was different now. His was preoccupied with billion-dollar deals. Mine was filled with the silent alignment of final preparations. He helped clear the plates, a rare domestic gesture. As he carried them to the sink, he paused, looking out at the backyard. "The garden looks good. You've done a nice job." "Thank you," I said. It was an observation, not a compliment. A note on the maintained state of a property. He left to go play a round of golf with a client, a Sunday ritual. I stood at the sink, washing the pan, the spatula, the plates. The warm water flowed over my hands. Thursday. The closing. The day his professional focus would be absolute, his attention furthest from home. I finished cleaning the kitchen until it was spotless. Every surface wiped, every item put away. Order was my baseline, the canvas upon which I would now make my final move. I went to my office. On my calendar, I marked Thursday. Not with words, just a simple, bold circle drawn with a red pen. Then I opened a new document and began drafting 2 emails. I did not fill in the addresses or the final details yet. I simply wrote the skeletons, the frameworks of the messages that would be sent on that day. One to Alina Vance, one to the senior partners at Robert's firm. I saved them as drafts. They sat in my folder, dormant, waiting for the trigger. The rest of Sunday passed in quiet normalcy. I read a book. I took a walk. I prepared a simple dinner for myself, as Robert texted he would be eating at the club after his golf game. That night, the house was entirely my own. The silence was not lonely, it was capacious, full of potential. I reviewed my spreadsheets, my legal notes, my calendar. Every element was in place. The money was secured. The law was on my side. The house was mine. And now I had the timing. The performance was nearing its final act. All that remained was to deliver the lines I had written, on the stage I had set, at the precise moment when he would be most vulnerable. I turned off the light and went to sleep in the large, empty bed. My sleep was deep, untroubled, and dreamless. Thursday arrived without fanfare. The sky was a pale, cloudless blue. Robert had left on Tuesday morning with a packed suitcase, his mind already sequestered in the glass and steel tower of his firm. He had called once, late Wednesday night, his voice ragged with fatigue, speaking of last-minute annexes and stubborn opposing counsel. I offered brief words of encouragement. The performance was almost over. I rose at my usual time. I dressed in comfortable clothes, not the business attire of my design meetings, but the soft pants and sweater of a woman at home. I made a single cup of coffee and carried it to my office. The house was profoundly still. This was the eye of the storm. On my desk, everything was prepared. The draft emails were open. The spreadsheet and supporting documents were compiled into a single PDF, attached to the message from my lawyer. The second email to the partners at Robert's firm was more delicate. I had cultivated those relationships over years of hosting dinners, remembering spouses' names, asking after children. I had their professional email addresses in my contacts, a resource Robert never imagined I would use for this. The first email was to Alina Vance. The subject line read, "Formal instruction to proceed Miller separation." The body was concise. Alina asterisk. "Please consider this email formal instruction to commence separation proceedings. Attached, you will find the financial documentation we discussed, evidencing dissipation of marital assets. I am the sole title holder of the marital residence at our address. Please file the necessary motions to secure my assets and petition for a separation agreement based on the attached evidence." I will be available all day by phone. Sincerely, asterisk. Valerie Wright. I attached the PDF. I read it over once. It was clear, professional, and devoid of emotion. It was a business communique, which was exactly what it was. The second email required more nuance. It was addressed to Thomas Gable and Margaret Cho, the two senior managing partners at Robert's firm. I had always liked Margaret. She had a firm handshake and direct eyes. The subject line was, "Urgent matter requiring disclosure, potential conflict of interest." Dear Thomas and Margaret, asterisk. I am writing to you on a matter of some urgency and professional ethics. I am Robert Miller's wife. It has come to my attention, through detailed financial review, that Robert has been systematically diverting marital assets from our joint accounts to a separate account under his sole control for the exclusive benefit of his adult children from his previous marriage over a period of years. I have documented evidence of these transfers, which total a significant sum. As these funds constitute marital property, their unilateral diversion for a purpose unrelated to our marriage may represent a misuse of said property. Furthermore, given that Robert's work involves the management of client assets and complex financial transactions, I believe this pattern of personal financial conduct raises a potential conflict of interest, or at the very least, a significant ethical concern that the firm's leadership should be aware of. My legal counsel, Eleanor Vance of Vance and Associates, will be filing formal separation papers today. Part of this process will involve securing and accounting for these marital assets. I am informing you of this situation as a courtesy, and because I believe in the firm's commitment to ethical practice. I have attached a redacted summary of the relevant transactions for your review. Sincerely, asterisk. Valerie Wright. I attached a version of the spreadsheet that showed the transaction patterns but redacted the exact account numbers and the recipient's identifiers. It was enough to demonstrate the pattern, not enough to be accusatory of the children. The tone was measured, concerned, and unassailably proper. It was not an attack, it was a disclosure. The implications would do the work for me. The clock on my computer read 9:04 a.m. The merger closing would be underway. Robert would be in a conference room, surrounded by documents and pressure. He would have his phone on silent, perhaps face down on the table. My finger hovered over the trackpad. There was no hesitation, only a final moment of acknowledgement. This was the point of no return. Sending these emails would transform my quiet preparation into public legal action. It would make the rupture official. It would set forces in motion that I could guide but not entirely control. I clicked send on the first email. A soft whoosh sound confirmed its departure. I navigated to the second. Click, another whoosh. It was done. I leaned back in my chair. The calm that settled over me was deep and absolute. The waiting, the planning, the secret maneuvering, all of it was complete. The trigger was pulled. Now I waited for the recoil. I performed one more action. I opened the settings for my business email account, the one connected to my interior design website. I set an automated reply. Thank you for your message. I am currently unavailable for new projects until further notice. For urgent matters, please contact my associate, Karen Ellis, at Karen's email. Best asterisk. Valerie asterisk. It was a small thing, but it felt significant. It was me, formally stepping out of the available, accommodating space I had occupied for so long. I was marking myself as temporarily closed for business because I had more important business to attend to. I stood and walked to the kitchen. I made a second cup of coffee. I stood at the window, looking at the garden Robert had noted looked good. It did look good. I had made it so. The morning passed with a strange, suspended quality. I did not pace. I did not fret. I tidied my office. I answered a text from Karen with a simple, "The emails are sent." She replied with a thumbs-up emoji. I put my phone down. I knew the sequence, roughly. Eleanor would receive my instruction and begin the filing process with the court. The motions to secure assets would likely involve notifying the banks, placing a temporary freeze on the joint accounts. That would happen today or tomorrow. Thomas and Margaret would receive their email. They would be shocked. Then they would be furious. They would pull Robert out of his closing, or they would wait until it concluded, their anger simmering. They would confront him with a professional and personal crisis all at once. Their firm's reputation was their most precious asset. Even the hint of a partner's ethical lapse, especially one tied to messy marital finances, was a threat to that. I had not sent the emails to hurt the merger, though that might be a collateral effect. I had sent them to strip Robert of his two shields, his professional invincibility and his financial control. He was about to lose both in the same hour. I ate a light lunch. I thought of nothing in particular. The machinery was in motion. My role now was to be the still, composed center around which the chaos would swirl. I was the plaintiff. I was the homeowner. I was the creditor. I went to the living room and picked up the book I had been reading. I sat in my favorite chair, the one with the best light. I opened it to the marked page. I began to read. The words were just shapes for a while, but I focused on them, forcing my mind to follow the sentences. This was the calm before, but unlike the tense quiet of the past weeks, this calm was genuine. The work was done. All that remained was to witness the results of my labor and to be ready when he finally came home. Robert did not come home that night. The merger closing, I assumed, had bled into the early hours. I slept through the night, a deep and untroubled sleep. When I awoke, the house was still mine alone. I showered, dressed in simple linen pants and a silk shell, and went downstairs. I was making tea when I heard his key in the lock just after 8 a.m. He entered the kitchen, looking ravaged. His suit was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot, but there was a grim triumph in his posture. He dropped his briefcase and suitcase by the door with a heavy thud. "It's done," he said, his voice hoarse. "We closed at 3:17 a.m. They folded on the final point. It's finished." "Congratulations," I said, my tone even. I poured boiling water into the teapot. "You must be exhausted." "I am, but it's a good exhaustion." He sank into a chair at the breakfast table, running a hand over his face. "The biggest deal of my career. The partners are ecstatic. The bonus will be substantial." I placed the teapot, a cup, and a small jug of milk on the table before him. I prepared my own cup, adding a slice of lemon. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes in the air. The scene was peaceful, domestic, a victorious husband returning to his supportive wife. He poured his tea, his hands shaking slightly from fatigue and residual adrenaline. "I'm going to sleep for 12 hours. Then we should talk about that vacation. Maybe we can plan something for the fall after all." He said it magnanimously, as if bestowing a gift. "Perhaps," I said, taking the seat across from him. It was then that his phone, which he had placed face up on the table, began to vibrate. The screen lit up with the name Thomas Gable Office, the senior managing partner. Robert frowned, looking at the time. "He's in early, probably just wants to slap me on the back." He swiped to answer, putting the phone to his ear. "Thomas, yes, it's over the line, thank you, He stopped. The faint, tinny sound of a voice, loud and sharp, leaked from the receiver. I could not make out words, only tone. It was not congratulatory. Robert's expression shifted from confused to alert. "What? Slow down. What are you talking about?" The voice on the other end grew louder, more distinct. I heard the words, "your wife" and "ethical breach." Robert's face lost its color. The weary triumph evaporated, replaced by a stunned blankness. That's not possible," he stammered, his eyes darting to me. I met his gaze and took a slow sip of my tea. The lemon was bright, tart on my tongue. "What do you mean she emailed you?" His voice rose. "What documentation?" The voice shouted now. I heard conflict of interest and marital assets clearly. Robert stood up so abruptly his chair scraped backward. "Frozen? What do you mean half the assets are frozen? Which accounts?" He listened, his free hand gripping the edge of the table, knuckles white. His breathing became shallow. "A lawyer, Vance. I don't know any Alina Vance." He was shouting now, panic erasing his fatigue. "This is a misunderstanding. You have to call the bank, tell them it's a mistake." The voice on the phone continued, relentless. Robert's shoulders slumped. He seemed to shrink inside his rumpled suit. "The firm's counsel? Why do we need a lawsuit? For what?" He listened, and his eyes widened in pure horror. "Potential malpractice? That's insane. Thomas, you can't be serious. This will blow over. Let me handle my wife." He said the last word with a venomous glance in my direction. I took another sip, placing the cup back on its saucer with a soft, precise click. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence as the voice on the phone finally stopped. I understand," Robert said, his voice now hollow. "I'll be there in an hour." He ended the call and let the phone drop from his hand onto the table. It clattered against the wood. He stood there, staring at nothing. The color had not returned to his face. He looked like a man who had been physically struck. Slowly, he turned his head toward me. His eyes were wide, uncomprehending. "What did you do?" The question was a whisper, stripped of all its former authority. I set my saucer down. I folded my hands in my lap. I looked at him, the man I had lived with for 11 years, now seeing me for the first time. "I retained counsel," I said, my voice calm and clear in the sunlit room. "I provided evidence of your dissipation of our marital assets. My lawyer has taken the appropriate legal steps to secure my share. As for the email to your partners, that was a courtesy. I believed they should be aware of a potential conflict of interest. It seems they agreed." He blinked as if the words were in a foreign language. "The accounts, they're frozen. Thomas said half of everything is locked. The firm's lawyers are talking about malpractice. The merger, the celebration," he trailed off, the reality crashing over him in waves. His professional triumph was now poisoned, his reputation under immediate scrutiny, his financial control shattered in a single morning. He stumbled back into his chair, his body folding into it. He stared at me, not with anger yet, but with a dawning, terrible understanding. "You've been planning this." I did not answer. I did not need to. The evidence was in the frozen accounts, in the screaming phone call, in the absolute calm with which I sat before him. The silence between us was total. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. The breakfast tea was cooling in its pot. The sun continued to shine. He had entered the kitchen believing he was at the pinnacle of his career. He now sat in the wreckage of it, and I was the architect. The phone call was over. The sound of his silence was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. He sat in the chair, shrunk into himself, staring at the surface of the table as if it held some answer. The shock was a physical thing on him. I watched him process, the wheels of his legal mind trying to find a foothold, a precedent, a loophole in what had just happened. "This is," he began, then stopped. He tried again, his voice gaining a shred of its old force. "This is an overreaction, Valerie, a massive overreaction. You've jeopardized my career over a marital disagreement." I did not move. "It is not a disagreement. It is theft. You took marital funds I contributed to, without my knowledge or consent for a purpose that excluded me. You called it your kids' need. You declared they needed it more than I did. That was not a disagreement. That was a statement of my value in this marriage. I heard you." He flinched but pushed on. "So you go to my firm, you try to destroy me. What did you think that would accomplish?" "It accomplished exactly what I intended. It made the private public. It made your personal conduct a professional matter. It stopped the bleeding of my assets. And it showed you that I am not the passive entity you assumed I was." He shook his head, a slow, disbelieving motion. "The spreadsheet. Thomas said something about a spreadsheet." "I have documented every transfer from our joint accounts to your separate account for the past 2 years. $87,000. I have records going back further, but that was sufficient to establish the pattern. The evidence is with my lawyer and, by now, with your firm's compliance office." His eyes narrowed. "You had no right to go through those accounts." "I had every right. They are joint accounts. You never revoked my access. You never imagined I would use it. That was your error." He stood up, packing a short, tight path on the kitchen tile. The panic was turning to anger now, a hot, scrambling anger. "You think this is a game? You think you can just freeze assets and send emails? I'll fight this. I'll get the best counsel. That prenup." The prenuptial agreement protects premarital assets and calls for equitable distribution of marital property. I interrupted, my voice flat. Your secret diversions are dissipation of marital property. That works in my favor, not yours. My counsel has already filed the motion. The freeze is in place. He stopped packing, turning to face me. What do you want? Money, is that it? You want to pay off? I want what is mine. I have already taken a portion of it, the portion I can clearly trace to my earnings and savings. The rest will be determined by the court. But that is not all. What else could you possibly want? He spat. This house. He laughed, a short, harsh sound. The house, our house, it's half mine. Is it? I asked. I stood then, slowly, and walked to my office. I returned with the deed. I placed it on the table in front of his empty chair. Read it. He looked at the paper, then snatched it up. His eyes scanned the lines. I saw the moment he found his name, or rather, the moment he did not find it. His face went slack again. This is a mistake. The title company made an error. No error. My credit secured the loan. The title is in my name alone. It has been for 5 years. You signed the mortgage documents as a co-borrower, but the deed is clear. This is my separate property, bought with commingled funds, which gives you a potential claim for reimbursement of your contribution. But it does not make it yours. He dropped the deed as if it had burned him. You planned this, from the beginning. I did not plan your betrayal. I did not plan your disregard. But when you showed me who you were, I believed you, and I began to plan my exit. The word exit seemed to finally make the situation concrete for him. His anger deflated, replaced by a cold dread. You're leaving me. You left me a long time ago. You just continued to live in my house and spend my money. I am making it official. I folded my arms. You need to pack your things today. You're throwing me out of my own home. It is my home. You are welcome to take your clothing, your personal effects, and any items that are solely yours. You will not remove any jointly owned assets or financial documents. My lawyer will provide an inventory list. You have until the end of the day. He looked around the kitchen, at the home he had commanded, and I saw the realization hit him. None of it was his. Not really. The foundation of his life was paper, and I had just lit a match to it. Where am I supposed to go? The question was quiet, pathetic. You have a membership at the club. You have your children. You have resources. That is no longer my concern. He sank back into the chair, his head in his hands. The victory of the merger was ashes. His professional standing was crumbling. His money was locked away. His home was not his home. He had nothing to negotiate with, no leverage. The lawyer in him saw the checkmate. I remained standing. I felt no pity. I felt a clean, sharp finality. After a long minute, he raised his head. His eyes were red but dry. You'll regret this. You'll see what it's like out there alone. I have been alone in this marriage for years, I said. The only difference is that now I will have peace, and my own name on the door. I left him there in the kitchen. I went upstairs to our bedroom, my bedroom, and began removing his suits from the closet, laying them on the bed. I pulled his sweaters from the drawers. I was methodical, unsentimental. He appeared in the doorway, watching me. Without a word, he found his suitcases and began to pack. The silence between us was not hostile. It was empty. The transaction was complete. By late afternoon, he was gone. The suitcases were loaded into his car. He stood in the foyer for a moment, looking at me as if trying to memorize the face of a stranger who had defeated him. He said nothing. He turned and walked out, closing the door behind him with a soft, definitive click. I locked the door. I engaged the deadbolt. I walked through the suddenly quiet, spacious house. It was mine. Every room, every window, every silent space. The sun was lower now, casting long, warm beams across the floors I would no longer clean for anyone but myself. The silence was not an absence. It was a presence. It was mine. The click of the lock was the period at the end of a very long sentence. I stood in the foyer, listening to the absence of his engine. The house did not feel empty. It felt unburdened. I did not celebrate that first night. I ordered a simple meal from a Thai restaurant I liked but Robert found too spicy. I ate at the breakfast nook, looking out at the garden. Then I took a long bath in the master bathroom, using all the hot water without considering anyone else's needs. I slept on my side of the bed, but the other side remained cool and undisturbed, and that was a relief. The next morning, I began. The first thing I removed was the large, abstract painting in the living room. Robert had chosen it. It was expensive and cold, all slashes of gray and silver. I carried it to the garage and leaned it against the wall. In its place, I hung a vibrant textile I had purchased years ago on a trip to Ghana and never displayed because it didn't match the aesthetic. Its colors of ochre, indigo, and crimson warmed the wall instantly. I called a furniture rental company and had them collect the stiff, modernist sofa he loved. I replaced it with the deep, comfortable sectional I had always wanted, upholstered in a soft navy fabric. I rearranged the bookshelves, putting my books face out, storing his legal texts in boxes in the basement. Each change was not an act of erasure, but of reclamation. I was not destroying our past. I was editing it, revising the narrative to include only the author who remained. A week after Robert left, Karen came over. She arrived bearing a bottle of champagne and a paper bag from the French bakery. "For the housewarming," she said, hugging me tightly on the doorstep. We sat in the rearranged living room. Sunlight streamed in through the windows I had washed that morning. She popped the champagne, and the sound was bright and festive. She poured 2 glasses. "To the homeowner," she said, lifting her glass. "To good friends," I replied. We drank. The champagne was dry and clean. "So," she asked, her eyes sparkling. "The details. I want all the details I couldn't get over text." I gave her a concise summary. The phone call, the confrontation, the deed, his departure. She listened, shaking her head with a mixture of outrage and satisfaction. "And the firm?" she asked. "Aliner says they've placed him on administrative leave pending an internal review. The malpractice talk is likely just pressure, but it's serious. He's retained his own counsel, of course. The asset freeze is temporary, but it gives Aliner time to negotiate a settlement. She believes, given the evidence and the house title, we will reach an agreement without a protracted court battle. He can't afford the scandal any more than he can afford to lose." Karen smiled. "So he's fighting, but he's already lost." "He lost the moment he decided my needs were negotiable and his were not," I said. The statement was factual, not bitter. We finished the champagne. She helped me hang a mirror in the hallway, one with an Art Deco frame I'd found at a flea market. As we adjusted it on the wall, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but with a prestigious area code. "Valerie Wright," I answered. "Ms. Wright, my name is David Chen. I'm a partner at Sterling Properties. We met briefly at the museum gala last fall. You were with your husband." I remembered a polite, older man who had complimented my earrings. "Yes, Mr. Chen, I remember. How can I help you?" "I'll get straight to the point. Margaret Cho is an old friend of mine. She mentioned you're an interior designer of exceptional taste and discretion." He paused, letting the word hang. He was referring to the quiet, legal way I had handled my situation. "We have a sensitive project, a historic property conversion into luxury condominiums. The previous design firm had a very public falling out with the investors. We need someone with a flawless aesthetic and a reputation for quiet professionalism. Margaret said you were the only person she would trust. Would you be open to a consultation?" I looked at Karen. She was watching me, her eyes wide. I felt a surge of something solid and warm in my chest. It was not excitement, but validation. "I would be very open to a consultation, Mr. Chen. Thank you for thinking of me." We scheduled a meeting for the following week. I ended the call and placed the phone on the table. "That was the CEO of Sterling Properties," Karen whispered, having overheard. "A partner, a referral from Margaret Cho." Karen's face broke into a huge, triumphant grin. "You see, the universe provides, or better yet, competent women provide for each other." After she left, I walked through the house again. The new sofa, the colorful textile, the clean surfaces. It was no longer a showpiece for a shared life that didn't exist. It was a reflection of me. It was comfortable. It was mine. I stopped before the large mirror in the hallway. I looked at my reflection, a black woman in her mid-40s wearing linen pants and a simple shell. My face was calm. My eyes were clear. For years, I had looked in mirrors and seen a wife, a helper, a support system. Now I saw the owner of the house, the author of the spreadsheet, the client of a good lawyer, the recipient of a major professional referral. I saw a woman who was no longer an appendix in someone else's story. I was the sole title holder of my own life. The future was not a wide-open, terrifying space. It was a series of manageable tasks, a design consultation, a legal settlement, a garden to tend. It was quiet mornings and chosen solitude. It was the ability to say yes or no based solely on my own judgment. I turned from the mirror and walked to my office. The spreadsheet was still on my desk, but it was now filed away in a drawer, a document of historical record, not a living plan. In its place was a blank notebook. I opened it to the first page. I picked up a pen. I wrote the date at the top. Then I began to sketch some preliminary ideas for a historic property conversion. The lines were confident. The ideas came easily. The silence in the house was not empty, it was full of potential, and it was all mine.